right? Judges 21, let's call this one prison, because this period in Israel's history is going to be marked by unprecedented freedom. But as we have already looked at in the chapters leading up to this final chapter of the book of Judges, that freedom is actually going to create a prison of their own choices, understanding that one person's freedom often provides someone else's misery. And that is exactly what we're going to see in this final chapter, where they're really, first of all, locked in a prison of confusion, where one of the first questions they're going to confront is, why has this happened? And if they had looked at the counsel that God gave them as to how they were going to effectively manage Israel as a nation, then they would understand that the things that they were doing were naturally going to lead to the nation becoming locked in all kinds of conflict and confusion. And that's exactly what happened. And they made it worse by partnering with the very people who failed to properly manage the land before they got there. And so they've done two things that God had told them from the very beginning were going to lead to misery, but now they're confused as to why they're here. And it's because they've drifted so far from wise counsel, both directly from God and from the judges who, as we mentioned before, they were willing to accept the judges' help out of their pit, but they weren't willing to accept their counsel as to how they could stay out of getting back into that low point in their lives again. And so they consistently ended up in this cycle of being bailed out of trouble and going back into trouble because they would accept the help but not the wisdom. And so they're here again. But they've gotten to a point where now they're looking at actually losing an entire tribe from the nation, and that's the tribe of Benjamin. And so in order to fix that, they're basically, in their point of confusion and moral obscurity, going to make a bad situation worse, because they're going to say, okay, who didn't show up to remedy the evil that Benjamin concealed? The evil that led to the civil war. And they're going to identify a town by the name of Jabesh Gilead as having sent no one to help in the fight. And so they're going to get the bright idea of saying, okay, well, let's get rid of Jabesh Gilead, since we promised to basically execute anyone who didn't show up to help. But let's leave the virgins alive for the men of Benjamin to now have wives moving forward, so that we do not lose a tribe in Israel. And so they're going to do that, but there's still not going to be enough women for the veterans, at least Benjamin's veterans from the civil war that's just ended in Israel. So they're going to make a bad situation even worse when they're going to say, okay, well, now we've got a festival coming up in Shiloh. And at that festival, there are going to be a number of young ladies. Let's kidnap those young ladies for the remaining men of Benjamin who have no wives. And so you can basically see that, as we said before, that very last verse in the book of Judges is going to describe how that's going to seem like a bright idea to some of the people in Israel, those who aren't losing their daughters, and the women who are not going to have to show up to a time of festivity and have that turn into a time of mourning as they are kidnapped and taken away to be the wives of men they don't know. Which is once again why it says at the very end of the book in verse 25 of chapter 21, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. But understand, it's not just in those days, because by the time we get to the prophet Isaiah 64 verse 6 is going to say something similar in a very famous passage that reads, "We have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment." And the more famous translation of that is going to say they're actually like filthy rags, which is why I sometimes say my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that we avoid the kinds of freedoms that seem clever on the front end, but in reality lock us into a place where even our well-intentioned deeds are once again just shady. For example, to the degree that we get good at spinning the facts and getting people to buy into an alternate version of reality, it can feel kind of clever. But understand, to the degree we want to tell the truth, it can become difficult, especially to the degree people have bought into our alternative reality for a prolonged period of time. It can be tough to tell the whole truth. And so we can find ourselves locked in a prison of our own fiction where instead of telling the whole truth, we are tempted to simply tell smaller and smaller lies, trying to weave our way out of the fiction that we've created, which is why we say His best to you as you go forward in Him, because to the degree we can avoid spinning alternate realities, we can avoid locking ourselves in a place where even our well-intentioned actions are still just shady.